And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Maybe starting like from the fossil record, where Darwin predicted that if evolution was true, then we should see, simple forms at the beginning, and then they progress to more advanced forms. And that is more or less what you see in the fossil record, where the first 3.5 billion years of Earth's history is represented by microbes. Um, and then, you come into the Precambrian, where you have some Precambrian fauna, and then the Cambrian explosion, the infamous Cambrian explosion. And then, as you go on, life progresses, and you get more complex and more derived forms. And that is what a fossil record looks like. Um, Evolution, why evolution is true. But so in regards to the fossil record, you can see that kind of progression. Even Darwin predicted that if his theory be true, that we would find intermediate forms or transitional forms that would, connect groups of animals together. And many of those have been found. For example, the whale transition, the horse transition, the Sirenians or manatee transition, or the bird transition. Um, what are the transition? The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and so on. There are many transitional forms have been found, and many lineages have been completed. Um, for example, crustaceans is a very complete has a very complete fossil record. Very diverse group, but very complete fossil record.
The fossil record, because I noticed he went right to fossils, and he's pretty well saying that we've got this type of fossil in this layer, and these types of fossils in these layers, and he's saying that it goes from simple to complex, or from marine fossils to land fossils in the order of evolution. A good acronym to look at is FARM, and that kind of just simplifies it, right? Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, in the order of evolution. That's what they believe. That's their ideas. But at the end of the day, emotion is incorrect when he speaks of this in regards to the fossil record, because we've actually got marine fossils all the way through. So it's actually a fact that even with dinosaur fossils, what do we have? We've got marine fossils buried with them. And what the observable evidence actually shows us and reveals is that the order of the fossils is actually the burial order of the flood. So it's just logical, if the flood began in the ocean, ripping up all those marine creatures and burying them on continents, they would of course be the first creatures to be buried. So the things that he talked about that are, at the bottom of, say, the geologic column, that's exactly what we'd expect to find under a creation model. Because as the floodwaters rose higher, you get the burial of the land animals, and this is exactly what we find. But he mentioned and I'm almost done here, he mentioned the first layers, and the Precambrian layers, the Cambrian layers. But when we go to the first layers, with an abundance of fossils in them, we see no fossils, and then layers with every one of the body plans of the major divisions of creatures and animals, which we would call phylum. Now, emotion, he called this the Cambrian explosion, if you were listening to his opening. So we go from layers with no fossils to layers with fossils as complex as, say, a trilobite. I'm sure everybody listening knows what a trilobite is. And a trilobite has a very complex lens system. And yet we see no real hint at ancestors below this and prior to this. So these creatures are fully formed and fully functioning. And why is this? Well, they've been living before the flood, and then they are suddenly buried. All of this speaks of intelligent design. That's what the fossil screams. So at the end of the day, he kind of looked to fossils. This isn't a discussion on flood geology or Noah's Ark or anything like that, but at the end of the day, bones found in the dirt, they're not inherited. Traits are. That's why I would look to genetics when talking about the creation evolution discussion. I'm going to let emotion respond here, but in my following response, I'm going to utilize genetics and the empirical evidence to show why evolution is not true and creation is true.
Burial by ecosystem. Burial by ecosystem. That's one thing. Usually when creationists talk about burial by ecosystems, and they would show you a diagram of the fossil record, and they would say, look, well, the Cambrian here shows where animals were buried first, the aquatic life, and so on and so on. What they always neglect to mention is that the Cambrian isn't a deep sea or ocean. The Cambrian is an era. So there was ocean in the Cambrian, but there was also continents in the Cambrian, and islands and rivers and so on. The only when you see the representation of the fossil record on a diagram, it's usually showing what life was present at the time. There was more life in the ocean than on land. On land was maybe just algae or something, but there wasn't any complex life on land at the time. But there was land in the Cambrian, which is strange that we never find any trees or anything there. If, according to creationists, um, you know, all these things should have existed at the same time. So yeah, it's kind of true because there were deserts and so on in the Cambrian as well, but there was no life to be found there. So no land life. Uh, they evolved millions of years after that. But I think that's it for that. The Cambrian explosion itself, it is relatively quick, yes, but I have to get that paper for you. Mathematical algorithms have been proposed to show that the variation you see in the Cambrian is evolutionarily possible. It's not something that, in the fossil record, how it looks as an abrupt something, but these forms were evolving long before that. It's just that the fossil record is kind of scattershot, so you find some things and certain things you won't find. There were many other quote-unquote explosions, like the mammalian explosion and so on. The creationists don't really argue on that because they are well represented in the fossil record, but the Cambrian is just, unfortunately, not well represented by fossils.
He also talked a little bit about, I'll touch on this real quick before I hand it back to him, was the ecosystems and the habitats through the burial of the flood. Now, this isn't a flood debate, of course, but he's looking at ecosystems and habitats in the world today and assuming that's how it was in the past. Some of these ecosystems that were destroyed in the flood, the entire earth was rearranged from a catastrophic flood. Those same ecosystems and habitats and environments, they would not be the same today. Some of these ecosystems may not have reflourished the way that they did in the past. So, for example, when we're looking at burial by ecosystems and habitats, he'll look at, it seems like he'll accept dinosaurs and humans, for example. Dinosaurs, for example, although lived at the same time of man, they didn't necessarily live in the same areas or habitats. That just wouldn't make any sense. So they were overcome by the flood at different times during the advancing of the waters. That actually explains why we don't find them buried together. They didn't live in the same habitat. So in the pre-flood world, we see certain fossils that are usually buried together. And then dinosaur fossils, for example, they're usually buried with gymnosperms, okay? And mammal fossils, they're usually buried with things such as flowering plants. So that indicates two different ecosystems in the past versus today. Now he'll look to, whales and sharks and oceanic animals. But the thing is, it's the exact same thing. There would have been different ecosystems in the pre-flood, not only on land, but also in the ocean. So his logic doesn't follow. And he talked about the Cambrian and deserts and different environments. That's the whole point. So he's assuming that it was in the past what it is today, and that's just false. The land of Eden, we're told, if you read Genesis, a river flows out of Eden, and we know rivers flow downhill, and so Eden was obviously at a higher elevation. So at the end of the day, we know certain animals, let's say dinosaurs, lived in more lowland areas, sometimes swampy lowland areas. And so various animals of various ecosystems and habitats, they're obviously separated from man and other forms of life. But we can talk about the fossil record all day. It comes down to genetics. What can you show me empirically and demonstrably and observe? I want to see some observations for evolution, not just some bones found in the dirt. So
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.